Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I am co-founder and managing partner of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions is the leading provider of lines of credit to nonprofits. Our line of credit program is easy, inexpensive, and costs nothing until used, making it a great cash backup plan for your nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the program, please visit us at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And if you decide to apply today, we will even give you a $250 credit on file. Or feel free to give us a call at 862-207-4118. Just remember, the time to set up your line of credit is now, not when the emergency actually comes up. And just for our listeners, we are fast becoming now the number one provider of lines of credit to small nonprofits. So it really has always been a need in the marketplace. We've been doing this for 10 years. And, I can't tell you how many times I actually have great clients that thank us for what we do. And, of course, we do this as a business. So I'm glad that we're helping the organizations that are out there. Today, I am excited for the second time to be bringing on Margit Brazda Poirer from Grants for Good. Margit is president of Grants for Good. She brings over 25 years of nonprofit management and grants experience to her clients through her company. She holds the GPC certification from the National Accredited Grant Professional Certification Institute and is one of only 20 nationally approved trainers. Margit has written and received over 20 million in grants from federal, state, private foundations, and corporate sources. She has a unique perspective of understanding both grant seeking and grant making, giving her experience leading a prominent foundation that issued over $1 million in grants annually. So, Margit, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast again.
Hi, Steve. It's great to be here again. I know we chatted not too long ago, so I'm thrilled to be returning.
Yeah, we're becoming good friends, and I love
Yep.
I love the work that you're doing. We're going to talk a little bit later on about the different programs you have, and I really believe in what you're doing. It just makes a lot of sense, and we're going to talk about your clinics and classes and the different stuff, and even your coaching that you do and stuff like that. But I have a lot of coaches on board, and they're all good, but I love the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So today's podcast is going to get listened to a lot, I know, because of the topic. And today's topic is how nonprofits can thrive, not just survive in a pandemic economy. So, I think everybody's looking to bear down, and we're past that phase where we're all deer in the headlights, and now we're trying to kind of pull ourselves out of that. Would you agree?
Partly, yes. The deer in the headlights is gone. I think we've had this dreadful reality check last year, and it's going into this year. My philosophy, I always want to find solutions together with nonprofits. That's what I'm in business for. You know that my specialty is grant writing, but working with nonprofits is so much more than that. So I coach them about how to get consistent streams of funding so they can do their really important work. That's really what it's all about. So last year I was already thinking about what's going to help nonprofits. And I'll tell you, just last month, we'll start with the bad news first, right? Just last month, I saw these startling statistics that Nonprofit Times News reported that 3 out of 5 nonprofits had to cut costs last year. And I can tell you, some of my clients, they had to furlough people. Some of them even had to get rid of their contract staff. And the survey also showed that over half of nonprofits plan to cut costs in 2021. So I love talking about this topic because clearly we are not even close to quite coming out of, a pandemic or the recession that was resulting from it.
So I think I was also, it's so easy to get locked up into the negatives. But I think I saw an article that said and don't hold me to this number, but 4 out of 5 nonprofits have not lost their funding for what they had done in the year before. So in 2019, And I think it was Nonprofit Times that had done it. Now, Nonprofit Times tends to be
Hmm.
geared towards some bigger nonprofits,
Yeah,
but
it really depends on the nonprofit. I had some clients that I've worked with that if you were dependent on state funding, you probably did lose some funding because the
yeah,
states lost out big time. So some of the agencies I'm aware of lost a lot because they were losing their steady stream of state funding. Then there were others that felt like the competition was more in the foundation world and in the corporate funding, which is true also. And
mm,
lastly, some people had trouble with federal funding because the same opportunities weren't always available. So I created an article that's on your nonprofit wisdom site. Thanks for posting it, Steve, called Three C's to Thriving in a Pandemic Economy. So I'm happy to, share some tips with you here too for our listeners in terms of what very specific things that you can do to thrive this year instead of throwing in the towel or having to furlough staff or having to have staff cuts at all. So,
yeah. So
I
let's
think,
let's start off with. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, I think our shared passion is, we want to see nonprofits do well because the work that they're doing is is so important in our society. And if you listen to one prediction that says about 1/3 of all nonprofits will be out of business in the next 2 years, I just think that's completely unacceptable. So, I've revamped my mission a kind of tenfold to get out there and tell people what can you do? How can you leverage grant funding to not only stay in business, but to expand programs or to hire more staff if that's what you need to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we get to the first say, let's not keep the suspense for our listeners. What are each of the three says? What are the word for each three says?
Well, I'll tell you the words for each, but they're going to sound like, oh, it's common sense, but just wait. So, contact, consistency, and congruency. And I'll give you some specific tips on each
Oh,
of
I didn't think that
those.
they were. I didn't think that they were going to be well known. Those are pretty. Now I'm curious.
All right. All
So
right. Well, you're in the right place.
contact, I
Sounds
kind of
good.
get. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, here's the thing. The first C is staying in contact with funders. Every fundraiser knows this, right? Anyone who's been a development professional, worked in a nonprofit, they know you have to be in contact with funders because it's really people giving to people, especially when you're talking about private foundations. But what I've found more often than not is when I talk to some of my clients or all of the webinars I teach, when I poll people, they really haven't been in contact with funders because they don't want to say the bad news, which is things like, well, our youth sports program is on hold right now. So they're wondering, how do we ask for money when we're not delivering a program because of COVID and safety protocol? Or we've got a theater group where the kids can't do their shows in person again because of safety and protocol. So, how can they possibly be justified asking for money? Well, here's the thing the foundations last year altogether, there was $450 billion given out in grants and donations last year. And let me just be kind of an economy geek for a second here. And you're going to like this, Steve, because I know your background is in finance, so you know this stuff. But a private foundation has to give out 5% of its annual assets of how it finished the year prior. So we know 2019 was a pretty darn good year on the stock market, right? So foundations had to give out 5% of their assets from 2019 in 2020. Well, guess what? 2020, this is what I would have predicted. I thought 2020, the stock market was going to see an absolute nosedive and it was going to stay there. And it didn't. It still finished strong.
Mhm.
So the foundations have more money than ever to distribute to charitable organizations in 2021. And that's why I'm still out here saying get out there. If you have never applied for a grant before, do it this year. I can walk you through it. Just do it because the money is out there. I don't know
Yeah.
what
I also heard.
2022 will look like, but it's out there this year.
Yeah, I heard that two things. I heard that foundations, knowing that things were rough out there, had actually upped their amount that they were going to be giving out as
Yeah.
well, because they knew it was rough out there. I don't know if if foundations, you would tell me this, if they have a set amount, they say, we will give out 8% every year, period, and that's it. Do they, is that changeable? But
Yeah,
what
it
is it?
is. And it's funny. I was executive director of a pretty large New York based foundation several years ago. And of course, we knew that we had to give out a minimum of 5% each year, or you get slapped with that excise tax. But most foundations want to give out more than that because they're
Mm,
gaining so much more than that in interest.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and what I found is when I was director of a foundation, it was during the recession of 2008 and 9, and we did give out more than the minimum 5% because people were suffering. Food, childcare, housing, shortages. So it was important to do that. And I'm seeing, and I'll get into some trends that are going to help our listeners. But in terms of contacting funders, the reason I say that is it's important to contact them no matter what is happening at your organization. In other words, contact the people that have supported you in the past and reach out to some new funders after you've done your research to tell them three things. Update them on how your organization is doing, and don't be afraid to share, the challenges, the tough stuff that's going on, because there's plenty of that. Secondly, tell them what you're doing. So you might want to highlight a particular program that is going really well. Or, to give you an example of my youth theater client, they're doing a lot of stuff virtual, and they're doing things in person outdoors or inside with less people in the shows. They're recording the shows. And the third thing is, and this is the most important thing, tell the funders you're talking to why you're still doing what you're doing. And the why
Mm,
is critical, because the why is what sells people. It's what gets right to the heart of the matter. And I can give you an example. One of my clients works with women who have been victims of domestic violence and yet are often located in the suburbs or rural areas and don't have easy access to services. And so they have a very unique program. Well, you may have seen in the news that domestic violence skyrocketed as a result of the isolation due to the pandemic. And we've got those facts and figures. Well, the executive director of this particular nonprofit, with every communication with the funder, she leads with this: they have seen an increase of 40% demand in their services. So when you say that, the funder's like, okay, well, what do you need for money? How can I help? If you've got a 40% increase in demand for your services, you need the money to do that too. And so they've been able to hire another therapist. They've been able to do a lot with that money. And we've seen about a fivefold increase in grant funding from last year, from 2019 to 2020,
Well,
just because of that. So it's possible.
let me ask you a question. I have a good friend he's just great at networking, and he's such also just an incredible person. And he doesn't ever his whole business, his career, is about networking, and and he never expects anything in return. So the way he looks at networking is just making friends, and he'll do anything for anybody, even if not asked. If he sees recognize something that someone needs that they don't even know, he'll just go do it without expecting anything in return. So my question to you is,
Nice.
I mean, yeah, and he's made a business out of this, but so my question to you is, when you are talking to your donors, um, is it more important to get into a personal level discussion with them, uh, or is it better to tell them what's going on in your organization?
I think it's a combination. I'll tell you what I always recommend, and what I do with our clients is we we like to really research the funders and understand what's important to them. Um, so if a funder's priority is in helping um, kids ages 0 to 5 become ready to enter kindergarten, to have different child readiness skills or to have good health, then it's important to understand what matters to the funder and be able to direct the conversation to that.
Yeah.
In terms of personal, not so much with grants. I mean, you don't need to know where their kids go to school and who likes
Yeah.
soccer and who
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, that could even be kind of creepy, You
Yeah.
don't want to be doing
Yeah.
that kind of research, but you
Yeah.
want to be talking to the mission of that foundation and show that what you're doing is aligned with that
Is
mission.
aligned to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my company, I started Grants for Good back in 2008, or 2009 rather. And so for the last 12 years, that's what we've been doing with clients is we've been talking about, we've been researching the funders, what's interesting to them, what kind of things do they want to fund? And if it aligns, that's when you make the contact. Don't bother if it doesn't. It's just you'll be wasting everyone's time. Plus, you get pretty frustrated. I've done some surveys with various audiences, and one of the most common concerns I hear is I have so much. They say I have so much trouble finding the right funders for my organization for our work, and then they apply to grants and get denied, and it's a terrible thing to constantly get these rejection letters. So,
Yeah. A
you
lot of
alluded to
work.
something at the beginning of this podcast, Steve. I have an online course that I love to get out to people. We've got a whole bunch of students in it right now. It's a self-paced online course. It's called All About Grant Writing. And if you go to allaboutgrantwriting.com, you'll see that an entire module is focused on how to find the best funder for you. Because if you don't start there, oh, you're just going to get lost and frustrated. And there's just no need for that. There's no need to make this any harder than it is. And it does appear to be difficult, but believe me, I've been doing it 20 years. There's shortcuts. It's just not that difficult once you get the hang of it.
Yeah. There's another thing I would add is that, you know, I've had 6 companies over the last 25 years that I've built. And, right now I own 3 companies and so I've been through 3 recessions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was through the 2000 in the 9/11 recession. I was through the 2008 recession, and now we're in this other recession. And the thing that I really learned with the 2008 recession was you have to really, really bear down and stay busy because at some point this will all turn.
Yes.
And it's when it turns, you want to be ready. And so you kind of like it really has helped my company through this recession, where we've done well, but we're always working on projects that we say, okay, uh, this is how we want to get better. And a year from now, we want to say we use this time wisely because honestly, sometimes during a recession, things slow down a little bit and you really want to kind of and the thing that I know is like you were saying about the number of nonprofits that potentially will be closing. um, you know Typically from my experience, a nonprofit or a small business will close when the executive director or the owner of the business has kind of given up.
Yeah,
It's
and you do have to keep going. And first of all, kudos to you for having 3 businesses through recessions, because
yeah,
that could not have been easy. And
yeah,
clearly, you've done what you're just talking about, which is stay busy, keep doing things, even though you might not see the return.
yeah,
So, in other words, making contact with funders now, and there is money out there, so you may see the return fairly quickly if you can get those grant applications out. But keeping that going no matter what is going on in the news, in the economy, with the pandemic, with your business or your nonprofit is so critical. Which, this kind of leads us into that second C, which is consistency. And it's exactly what you're speaking to.
yeah.
Is even though last year was difficult, I'm sure there were some days where it was just hard to go to work for a lot of people. I had to motivate myself many days, as I'm sure we all did. But it just seemed like every day you had to have something with a purpose to do. And and then the return came. Last year I spent a lot of last year developing allaboutgrantwriting.com, because I kept getting this question about, Margit, what do we do? They love the webinars, and then they say, well, can you just walk us through every step in the process? I just want to know how to get from A to Z and get the grants. And so that was my focus. And then in the fall, we launched the course. And now here's the reward. I've got students telling me they've just raised $200,000 in the last 6 months, which that's massive.
Mm,
So these are nonprofits that
yeah.
aren't going to go out of business. And consistency for our listeners today are, I would say, the number one thing you can do is get at least one or two grant applications out the door every single month. And this is what I teach in my courses. If you can do three, even better, but at least one or two a month. And you know why? Because funders will take about 3 to 6 months to reply. So, Steve, if you and I sit down, we write a grant today, we've got to wait 3 to 6 months, most likely, to get a check in the mail. So I would say let's get out there now, get one or two grant applications out a month, every single month. You get those grants going out the door and you get revenue coming in the door monthly too. And that's how you make grant funding be part of your revenue stream. It's just consistency. But yeah, it'll take a while to
Yeah.
get the reward.
Yeah, and there's a concept that's become very popular in the last 3 to 4 years, in the idea of, it's called funnels.
Mm-hmm.
And a funnel, think of a funnel, right? It's maybe even something like, if you have a lawnmower and you got to put gas into it, right? There's a funnel
Mm-hmm.
that you
Yep.
use to put the gas in, right? And the idea is you throw things in at the top, and then what comes out the bottom is in this case grants that you've gotten. Well, you're not going to get something out of the bottom if you don't put things in the top. And certainly
Yeah.
if you do a better job of putting, good grant writing in, then the bottom will end up, and there's going to be a ratio, right? You're going to find out that for every 10 grants you apply for, maybe you win one, but then you find out that every 3 years when you apply to the same foundation, your percentages go up. So it's just a game, really, a strategy, where you got to keep the pipeline going, so to
The
speak.
strategy is definitely keeping the pipeline going.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the tactics to meet that strategy really involve very specific things. They involve things like researching and finding the best funders so that you're not, so that, to use the funnel analogy, so it's not this wide. You don't
Yeah.
want to spend all your time grant writing. People I know at nonprofits, it's kind of the last thing they want to do. They
Yeah.
want that to be quick and easy. In
Yeah.
fact, one of the biggest challenges I hear, again, out there in the community, is we don't have the time. Or I hear people saying, we're a one woman or a one man show, here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's really critical to help people save time in their grant writing process. And part of that is finding the right funder. Another part is developing this template grant application for a particular high priority project at your organization, right? You get that template and then you can start to cut and paste pieces and apply to, like you just said, 10 foundations. And well, I think you're going to get more than 1 out of 10. Our clients definitely get a lot more than that. But the goal is
That's
really
good.
to streamline it, to
Yeah.
to write one or two really good proposals and then just modify them for different funders. Now, if it's a federal or state
Yeah.
grant, it's a bit of a different animal, but still, you can get that funding.
Yeah, I'll give our listeners an analogy. It's kind of interesting. So I decided in December of 2019 to do the Nonprofit MBA podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a variety of reasons, getting our name out there, giving back, having fun, meeting some really good
Yeah.
people, on the podcast. There were a variety of, definitely it was, more business oriented, of course, but and so, I didn't know anything about it. So, like, how to produce a podcast, and I can't tell you how many steps it's more than just us recording the podcast. They have to get written up. They get written up
Yep.
into an article. They get posted to our website. They have to have a
Mm-hmm.
certain format. They
You need
go up
new
on our,
technology that you have to
yeah, I
learn,
mean,
all of
yeah,
it.
it's all this, that has
Yeah.
called social
Yep.
media. You have to have a good mic. Yeah, we were
Mm-hmm.
talking We were talking about that before.
Right.
You have to
Yeah.
have the right setup. You have to have guests. So like
Yeah.
I don't want to go through every step with and waste everybody's time, but there is tons and tons of steps. And I just said, all right, listen, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it all. It's going to take some time. And as when I do it more and more and more, I'll get a process down and I'll be able to outsource it. In other words, I'll be able to outsource the writing. I'll be able to outsource the posting to the website, the
Yeah.
getting emails
Yep.
out there, right? And so the objective was in 2020 when I come out now, now I have all the hard stuff outsourced, and all I need to do is talk to my guests. And now this year, now I move to the next level, which is making my podcast better,
Hmm.
right? Which is like a little bit better at it. So the point I'm trying to say is just like with grant writing, it's like at first it's a long, hard slog, and then you get the process down, and it becomes much easier, and then you can do 2 to 3 grants, you know,
Well, I'll tell you, it was a
applied.
long, hard slog for me because I didn't enter this profession on purpose. And this is what's kind of funny is, my master's of science is in environmental resource management. I worked in that
Huh?
field for 20 years. And I did
Wow.
write grants because I wanted to do biofuel projects. I was also working in water quality protection. And so for me, it was a slog. But for listeners here, it does not have to be. I mean, you can learn this in a month. And, if you've got the right training and you're willing to go through this structured, in All About Grant Writing, I just have this structured process where there's a 7-day plan to write your grant proposal. And there's a workbook. When you
Yeah.
finish that, it is done. I think to myself, when
Yeah.
I learned
Yeah.
grant writing, Steve, it was early 90s. Okay. So you might remember the early 90s. There was no internet. So I had to learn and just pick up what I could in hopes that I would get this big federal grant so that I could do a water quality project on Lake Ontario where I live. And it was great when it came through, but it was like, okay, how do I make the next one better? It was totally trial and error. Totally. And I never expected to
Wow.
start my own business. It's just, it was just kind of a funny set of circumstances. And all of a sudden, Grants for Good was born. And lo and behold, 12 years later, I'm here and I'm loving it because I work with the best people. I work with these incredible people at nonprofit organizations. And the minute they get the grant funding that we're looking for, all of a sudden I'm hearing them say, Margit, guess what? We can serve, 400 more people this year that need it. Or we've got, um, 300 more kids that are getting mentored after school that were so close to dropping out. And I'm like, oh, this is why I do what I do. That's the
Wow.
joy of it.
I
You,
had to
you get
laugh
those kind of reports and it's
I had to laugh.
exciting.
Yeah, well, that's what's those that makes it a fun day. I had to laugh when you said before the internet because it just flashed through my mind. I'm like, those were the days. It was so much better before the internet. I was saying to a friend the other day about when I was at college. I was like, I'm 56, so I'm a little older than you are, but we had no cell phones, we had no
No,
email, and I was like, how did we get a hold of our friends? Back then it was,
you
you
needed a
know, you
driver's license.
no, no,
Yeah,
and you're
you
at
had to
college, you didn't
get
have a
there.
car, so I don't even,
Right.
anyway, it's kind of beside the
Yeah,
subject, but
yeah.
but
But with
um,
internet, I mean, look at how
yeah. So
easy it is
what's
to
the?
find funders. It's easier. Go ahead.
It is, but unfortunately, it's easy for everybody, right? So you have
Right.
more
Yeah.
competition now, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
it's
You
not
got to
as
know
much
the
a skill set.
shortcuts.
Yeah, yeah, and so you gotta
Definitely.
get this. You gotta get this process down. You got to, it's a volume, quality and volume. You got to do both of those things, right?
Yeah.
So what's the third C?
Okay, you want to know what that's all about. So, definition of congruency is technically the quality of agreeing or being suitable and appropriate. All right. So, essentially, the reason I threw this in here is that this kind of goes with what I mentioned earlier, where whatever work you're doing or whatever change you're making in the community has to be important or go right to the heart of what a foundation or a state or a federal grant wants to fund. So, yeah, that sounds kind of like common sense. But things have changed in the last year. So, here's what I saw happen in 2020, and I'll tell you what I think is coming up this year. In 2020, completely because of the pandemic, we saw a lot of foundations pool their resources and fund pandemic relief, which could mean anything from purchasing PPE equipment to putting up those plastic shields, that you see in stores, or maybe purchasing uh, software so that you could do virtual or online learning or mentoring or programs. So it was very much pandemic related. And then it also increased to focus on racial justice. And that's what I'm seeing this year, especially. I'm seeing a lot of foundations focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also trying to eliminate racial injustice, structural racism, and seeing that as a health issue. So I'll give an example. One of the biggest foundations, I'm coming to you from Rochester, New York. One of our biggest foundations, the Health Foundation here, realized that racism is a health issue and it's become a priority. Whereas in years prior, they were more focused on, childhood health, obesity in children, sometimes medical issues. So that's a pretty big shift, right? So I've seen those shifts happen in a number of foundations, basically focusing on pandemic relief, which has now kind of expanded to how do you open theaters? How do you get arts and culture back in the community? So it's expanded a little bit in 2021, which is
Yeah.
great news for some of my clients. And then also the second thing, the diversity, equity, inclusion piece, I feel like has also broadened in 2021, which means two things. One, maybe you're already a perfect fit for one of those two categories, in which case, go for it, run to those funders and get grant funding for your work. But secondly, maybe you're not a perfect fit, in which case, what about looking at what you can do? I'm not saying reinvent the wheel, don't get away from your mission, don't create all new programs. But are some of the programs you're doing now already making a big difference in terms, to help maybe people of color or poorer communities, or to bring in more inclusion into your work? So if there's opportunity for that, and I'm
Mm.
guessing there's opportunity for that in just about every organization out there right now, well, there's an opportunity to get a new grant funder on board, investing in your programs.
I think it takes someone like you to point out these things, these questions that you'll ask to an executive director or a board member, which gets them thinking outside the box, which they may not have done if they hadn't listened to you or another consultant or something. It's the questions that someone else asks that you would not have thought of that I think really I'll give you another scenario.
Yeah, it's been a
So
long 20 years, so I think I've pretty much heard all the questions. That's why I love to help people just navigate this stuff.
yeah, one of the advantages you have too is that you're you're the go between all these other nonprofits. So you're seeing what some best practices are at other nonprofits, and then you're able to be the congruent. Is that the right word? Congruent. You're
Conduit.
the
That's it.
conduit.
Another
Yeah,
C.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. We can add that to the fourth one. So
Right.
you're the So I think that's very advantageous because someone will be doing something, and then you can kind of tell the rest of the group that's involved with you, hey, have you thought of doing this, or what do you think about that? And that's a powerful, because we all get in our silos, right?
Right. Yeah, you got to have a fresh set of eyes sometimes, someone to help you really make the strongest case for your work. Yeah.
I'll give you another scenario too, and it gets to be getting out of your comfort zone. And I have this commercial building that I own, and one of the office spaces that I rent to is this organization that helps kids that cut themselves. And she has a small office, I know that they've been struggling, and financially. And so, I was talking to her, and I'm like, so what are you doing for fundraising? So she was like, well, we bought all these buttons, and we're selling these buttons for $1 each.
Hmm.
And in the back of my head, I'm like, this is gonna turn into like $100 at the most. It's
Yeah, and
never
it's going to
going to
be a
be
lot of work to generate
yeah,
a small amount of
a
money.
money, right?
And the
And
result
really,
is some frustration. And then you're asking your board and volunteers to do a lot of work, which they could be spending that time helping introduce you to people at various foundations. You're not going to get bored. You're not going to get board members asking for money outright. But if they can make an introduction to somebody on a foundation so that you can then call and say, hey, I'd like to introduce my organization, tell you what we're all about. And we think we align with your mission. We'd love to be invited to apply this year. So kind of building those relationships. I'd rather see board members and volunteers doing that than selling buttons for $1. And I've seen
yeah,
that
and
exact
that's
scenario.
yeah,
I know exactly what you're talking, the chicken
and that's my
barbecue.
point.
Same thing.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
mean,
going
it's
to
my
yield a
point.
lot of
It's like,
funds.
listen, yeah, you got to take a step back, and the number one biggest thing that you could do to bring the biggest impact in your organization is grant writing. It's the biggest thing.
You're gonna make
Well,
a
one
lot of
of
money
one of them.
eventually with it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I
definitely
mean,
one of the key pieces of the pie to your revenue stream. It's not the end all. I would never say to a nonprofit, just make sure all your revenue comes from grants. Usually it's, maybe 30%. Now, having said that, I've worked with small grassroots nonprofits where about 80 to 90% of their money came from grants.
yeah,
So I have had that. I've seen that quite a bit too. But for the most part, you've got to diversify that income stream. But yeah, the grant funding is critical. Even, the line of business you're in, Steve, I mean, you offer lines of credit, which cost nothing to obtain. I've had clients get lines of credit, and it's great because it tides them over until they really get their grant writing program up to speed, where they're seeing
yeah,
regular checks coming in the mail all the time.
yeah,
And that's where you
yeah,
want to be at, is having that regular source of income. And it's a really
yeah, and I think
structured process, and you can learn it. You can totally learn it. I did. I poured 20 years of experience into an online course so that nobody would have to go through what I did and make the mistakes I did. And being a scientist at heart, it's structured. I like to give people, here's the step-by-step process. Do it and you'll succeed.
yeah, and I think it's just yeah, it's just like an analogy I use with the podcast. You have to, you know, you just got to get started. You kind of, like we deal with a lot of one
Yeah,
million, $2
jump
million
in.
dollar size revenue nonprofits, and when I talk to the executive directors, you know, the, they have the grant writing, like I say, what's going on in your world, and they're like, well, we got to get this grant writing thing going, and
It's
it's
hard.
very
Yeah.
common. They
Yep.
say that a lot.
Or they say, where do we even start
Where do you
with a small
start?
staff?
Yeah,
Exactly.
and you just what my answer, I don't tell them this because I'm not an expert at it, but I am an expert in taking an idea and making it real. That's what I am an
Hmm.
expert at. And you can never make an idea real if you don't make that first step. So I mean, the first
Yes.
step would
Yeah.
be, look at your online training courses. I would say that's a first step,
Hmm.
right? Talk to you, that's a good first step. And then,
Look, the smaller grassroots nonprofits that you're talking about with budgets of 1 million or two, they might be able to afford a grant professional and they might not. And I work with some that are much smaller than that. So really sometimes your best bet is train yourself first. And then if you need that extra help, contract out with a grant professional too. You
yeah,
can do that also. So um, I don't know how long we have today, but I love talking to you about this. Can I offer like a discount code to people for my course?
yeah,
Because
yeah. I was
as
going to
we're
ask you for
and
that.
I'm
Yeah,
totally winging this. I just came up with it because I'm like, what? I don't know who's listening today, but somebody might be saying, well, okay, how do I get into this? What do I do? So I want to offer a 10% discount to anyone listening. And I'm going to give that people a code. Okay. And I'm going to keep it simple. I'll keep it nonprofit, the word nonprofit 10. And that's going to get you 10% off. And the course is at allaboutgrantwriting.com. All right. So when we get off this
yeah.
call, I'm going to get on that website and I'm going to make sure that coupon code works for any of our listeners. And then the second thing I want to offer is just a freebie. If you're really new to grant writing and you're not even sure how to get started or if this is for you, I've got a free guide on my website called 7 Steps to Grant Success. Just grab that first, okay, and take a look at it to make sure this is something you want to get into. And Stephen, I know you're good about putting all this stuff into writing. My website is Grants for Good. So it's grants, the number 4, good.com. And you'll see you can download your free guide right there. So grab that too. Call me with any questions. But I do this. I focus so much of my energy now on talking to folks like you to reach as many people as possible, because I just don't think people should have to suffer for getting funding. And grant writing should not be a mystery or something that only certain special people can do. It's something that everyone can do, and they shouldn't have to be stressed out and spend all their time thinking about it. Not when we can make it, streamlined and simple.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would suggest too is like, consider, even summer's coming up. Consider maybe bringing in some interns.
Yeah,
I
you could
see
do
that
that.
works out kind of well.
Yep.
There's an old adage. It's called LUDI, and LUDI stands for learn, understand, teach, and inspect. So it's like, you can learn about grant writing. You learn it, then you understand it, then you teach it to somebody else, and then you just inspect their work.
Yeah.
So uh, so it's good stuff. A great topic. I would like to thank very much Margit from Grants for Good for coming on today's podcast.
Oh, you're welcome. This was my pleasure. I'm happy to help. I love chatting with you, Steve, and I'm excited we've got people driving in the car listening to this or watching it on YouTube. I just think the more people that get into this, the better. And someone said to me, they said, well, Margit, grant writing, it's not very sexy, is it? I'm like, well, what's great though, is when you get all that funding coming in the door. And yeah, it is. And all a grant
That's sexy.
is a really well planned idea put to writing. And hey, you got to
Well,
do your planning anyway, right? You may as well get
yeah,
paid for it in grants. So
it's sexy when
it's
you get the
worth
money.
it.
When you get the
Yeah.
money, it's
Yeah. Pretty
sexy.
exciting when those checks
Yeah.
come in the mail. Let me tell you. People are
And if you
pretty
get that
happy
process
with
going,
it.
it happens. I
Oh
get you.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
to our listeners
Good.
for today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend, and also subscribe in your favorite podcasting app to our nonprofit MBA podcast. If you like today's podcast, please also give us a review on your podcasting app to help us get the word out to other nonprofits. And of course, if you're looking for a line of credit for your nonprofit, you can call us 862-207-4118 or visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. Margit, if you can just, I know you said the coupon code was nonprofit 10. And
Yes.
again, what's the URL that people would go to put that in?
Yeah, you can learn all about the course. Go to All About Grant Writing. So it's one word, allaboutgrantwriting.com. And what you'll see on that page is you can take a little 4-minute video tour of behind the scenes, what the course is about. It'll tell you what's included in each of the 8 modules. What you're going to find out is that the great thing about the course is you buy it and you can take 6 weeks to complete it, or a year, or 5 years if you want, because it's yours for life. It's not one of those courses where, okay, you've got 60 days to finish and then it disappears. You buy it once and you immediately can download and access all those courses. There's a reason I did that. It's so that people can binge watch if they want and get right on it. Or what if they get started 1 month and then there's a huge deadline, and then a few months later they want to pick it up again? Well, it's still there. So yeah, check it out. Nonprofit 10 is your 10% discount at allaboutgrantwriting.com. And I hope to see you in the
Good
course, because
stuff.
along with the course, you get live support and help from me. And I want to get more people into it and help more people. So it'll be fun. Looking forward to
Yeah,
seeing folks
makes
in
complete
there.
sense.
Cool.
All right, good job today. So I just want to thank all our listeners out there for the work that they're doing in the nonprofit communities. It's so sorely needed. We all have to give back in some way. We're all connected, and and for us. And so I just wanted to thank our listeners for the work that they do. I'm sure they don't get enough accolades, And I know you don't do this for the money. So, thank you for the work that you're doing. We really need you to keep doing what you're doing. And everybody stay safe. Have a great day. And summer's right around the corner. And I think a lot of people are happy about that. Take care, everybody.
Definitely.